So let's start off, fellas, if you don't mind, just by each of you introducing yourself to everybody and talk a little bit about your background and what you do.
Okay, I guess I'll go first. My name's Doug McCartney, and I'm a securities lawyer. I operate out of Calgary. My clients, however, are all over Canada. And a lot of my clients are real estate developers, and Ken Dunn is one of my clients. So when Ken has a project, Ken will come to me when it's time to do the fundraising. I don't help him identify the projects. And we'll figure out a plan of what it looks like, what he can design to make sure that he's got something that his investors will find appealing. And then we'll figure out how to do it in a legally compliant way. So that may sound boring, but I'm a lawyer and I think it's really, really exciting. And I'm sure there'll be lots of questions at the end about do's and don'ts. It's actually really important. And one of the things that Ken does, and I've been to several of these types of investor summits, is I don't know anybody else who's actually saying, make sure you do it in a compliant manner. And here's some tools to help you do it in a tax-effective manner that can really allow you to widen your net. So that's a little bit about me, and I'm looking forward to the next half hour and any questions.
Awesome.
Yeah, my name is Dwight Martin. Evan and myself co-founded the company Axiom, and we are both accounting background with some tax expertise thrown in there. We've been business partners going on plus 20 years, so it tells you I'm the patient one of the group. But seriously, you know, we got involved with helping private companies raising capital and doing things the right way because we saw out there that private companies didn't have the tools to access capital, especially registered funds. And when we say registered funds, we're talking in terms of like RSP, TFSAs. And so, you know, we saw that they were at a disadvantage. And so we set out to create structures that come alongside someone like yourself, we would refer to as a private owner, to access that capital. And so that's what we do. We say we create tax-efficient structures, which is a fancy term, which basically allows you to go to investors and have those investors use their RSP or TFSA. So it levels the playing field and gives you an opportunity to access that capital. Evan will probably give you a little hint of how big that capital pool is.
Yeah.
Thanks, Dwight. I don't know how much more I can add after that. As usual, Dwight does all the talking. But I'm just going to say, yes, I'm a CPA as well, and I'm just going to give you a little hint. Later on this afternoon, I'm going to be talking more about registered funds and MFTs. We'll drill down a lot more. So we'll just give you little hints for the next little bit here with the panel, but come and see me later, and we'll dive into that in a lot more depth.
I fell in love with the MFT concept at the beginning of this year. Actually, it was a year ago we set it up. We started the process to get it going. But I don't think a lot of people really understand what it is. I don't think a lot of people really understand what a REIT is and what the difference between them. I know you're going to get into extreme detail on this afternoon, but maybe just a little bit of an overview on like exactly what an MFT is and why would people bother to do it?
Sure. It's really quite simple in the concept for it, and that basically is there's a massive pool of capital out there called registered funds, which is RSPs, TFSAs, and other ones like that. And basically, if you're a developer, or even if you're in another business, you need to raise capital. There's a massive pool of capital out there, but it's called registered funds, and you have to go through a special structure such as a mutual fund trust to be able to access it. And that's what we do. We'll set that up for you. So the whole purpose really is for you to access capital in a much faster way.
Awesome.
Yeah, I'll just add to that is that the Income Tax Act doesn't allow for a registered fund to invest directly into real estate. So you need a vehicle to be able to do that. So that's what we do is we create that intermediate vehicle to allow that investors can then invest into the real estate.
Absolutely.
And one of the things that Ken said was a mutual fund, and he raised a REIT. So I get this question an awful lot. What's the difference between a mutual fund trust and a REIT? So at the various highest level, a REIT is publicly listed. That means it trades on a stock exchange somewhere. And so a private REIT is an MFT or a mutual fund trust at a high level.
Okay.
Every REIT is an MFT, but not every MFT is a REIT.
Yeah, basically, there's,
Whenever I'm around Doug, I realize how simple my mind is. Okay, so look, the reality is all of us in this room, we all have the same goal. We want to buy real estate. We want to use 100% borrowed funds to do it, other people's money to do it, because that's what the wealthiest people in Canada do. But unfortunately, most people who get into real estate investing don't do it with the benefit of being in a room like this up front to learn the right ways to the wrong ways to do it. We see a lot of things that I would honestly say before I started hanging out with you guys a few years ago, I wouldn't have realized so quickly all of these things that are just wrong, that are just illegal to be doing. And when I say illegal, I don't mean that if somebody is found to be doing it, they're arrested by the cops and thrown in jail. It's not criminal law. We're talking about securities law, which can actually get you in more trouble if you're doing that. Some of the things that I'd like to get into are promissory notes, are, some of these comments we're seeing online and social media and things that maybe people just aren't doing the right way because they don't understand what they're doing. I almost feel like I want to start with promissory notes because that's where we've spent so much time talking about. So in the world of fundraising, when you go out and raise money, if you do this exactly the right way, you should be able to raise all the money you're doing through mortgages against the properties. And we talked about that yesterday, where if you're doing a house flip, you're going to borrow 100% of the money in first and second place, then you get an appraisal done to say what it's worth at the end, and you borrow that money and security against the property. But there's a lot of times where people are using promissory notes to raise money, where they are trying to get money faster than a mortgage can be registered. And there's a lot of mistakes that are made with them. Maybe we should just start off there. What are some of the things that you've seen with promissory notes that can get people in trouble?
Yeah, okay, for sure. And Ken's absolutely right. When real estate is absolutely a great industry, entrepreneurship is great. And so when people are going out there and they're doing their first deal, let's say it's a house flip, you're not doing resorts yet, you're going to start somewhere. And so you might borrow money from someone you've been introduced to or from someone you know. And so you would evidence that debt by issuing that person, the lender in this case, a promissory note. Okay, that all makes sense to me. I borrow money from Dwight, and that's a promissory note, and I go ahead and do my house flip. It's actually not that simple. A promissory note is a security under securities laws. An MFT unit is a security, a limited partnership unit is a security, and what everyone's most familiar with, a share in a company is a security. All of those things are securities. So if you're going to go out there and use a promissory note, you can still do it, but you have to understand that it's a security. And if it's a security, that means that you have to have a securities exemption in order to do the deal with the person that's going to be lending you the money. And so there are some pretty well-known exemptions, hopefully well-known, I guess, amongst us, and that would be an accredited investor. So if I wanted to borrow the money from Dwight and Dwight's an accredited investor, that's great, but I want to evidence the fact that Dwight's an accredited investor by having him sign a subscription agreement in addition to issuing him the note. And in that subscription agreement, Dwight will actually confirm to me contractually that he's an accredited investor. An accredited investor is someone who has net assets, not including their house or primary residence, of $1 million, or their net income for the last 2 years was $200,000, or combined with their spouse, their net income over the last 2 years was $300,000. So I've confirmed that Dwight is an accredited investor. He signed a subscription agreement. It doesn't have to be that complicated. But Dwight signs and he says, yep, I'm an accredited investor, and he tells me how. Contractually, he represents and warrants that to me. So there we go. We've done it properly. And now if the investment goes bad for some reason, I am protected as the person that's done the deal from Dwight coming back and saying that the promissory note wasn't issued correctly because I've complied with securities rules. So there are some other exemptions out there, close friends and business associates and family. So the reason for those exemptions is that the securities commissions have determined If a person is in a close relationship with you, so the family one is the easiest, it's your siblings, it's your parents, it's your children, and it's your grandparents. It's not your third great aunt. It has to be direct. You can do that, and the reasoning behind that one is that you know each other well enough that that person's going to be able to ask you any questions that they have about it. Another one is a close friend. And again, the thinking there is that if you're close friends, you guys would have an opportunity to discuss it, and the person who's possibly investing could ask you any questions that they have about it. But a close friend, just so you know, again, so if Dwight is my close friend, instead of being an accredited investor, again, I would have him sign a subscription agreement, and Dwight would say how he's my close friend. In this case, I've known Dwight for 17 years. We've done an awful lot of business together. We've had dinner.
A few times.
Well, a few times, but I actually, he has been to my house. You could maybe remember where the bathroom is, because that's one of the questions that people say is, does that person know where your bathroom is in your home? So that's one of the things that people use as kind of a litmus test for whether or not it's a close friend. And then another one is a close business associate. So again, I've known these guys for 17, 18 years. We've done a lot of business together, so we're absolutely close business associates. But Dwight would put it down there that I met Doug in whatever it was, 2007, something like that, and we've done all these deals together. If you meet someone this weekend, they're not going to be your close business associate on Monday. Right? So it has to be someone, there has to be a length to the relationship, and for the close business associate, it has to be such that you guys have actually discussed business at length, or you've done business as well together. So to go back to the promissory note, and sorry I've just been rambling on and on here.
Anybody like his rambling?
A promissory note is something that can be used. I know it's used a lot in real estate, but I think a lot of people, when they get involved, they think, it's just a debt instrument. Ontario Securities Commission, BC Securities Commission, they have absolutely determined, it's settled law, a promissory note is a security. So if you're going to do the promissory note, just add another document, and that way you've made sure that you've covered yourself and you've complied with securities law. So I think that that's where Ken was going, that when people get involved, without even realizing, there's no ill intent there, it's just the fact that they had no idea that it was a security. And securities laws sound so scary, but it's actually not. If you just talk to somebody, a securities lawyer that knows what they're doing, they can give you a subscription agreement same day and show you how to fill it out.
I learn from these guys all the time. So what he just inferred there is that if you're going to do a promissory note for any reason whatsoever, if you want to stay completely compliant with the law, first of all, in your promissory notes, you really should put a personal guarantee. If you're willing to raise money, you should personally guarantee it, or whatever assets you have to guarantee it. But the part I got confused about was this idea of a subscription agreement. Because when I hear that term, the general public, when you hear subscription agreement, you think it's something to do with raising equity. Like selling stock, you need a subscription for that, but that's not the case. A subscription agreement applies to the security, whether it's a lendable security or equity securities.
Absolutely. So if I wanted to buy a share in one of Ken's companies, let's say that we're setting up a resort somewhere, and Ken and I are going to be we would both, go to the lawyer's office, they'd send us something on our phones, DocuSign, we'd subscribe for like 100 shares each. It's no different if you're doing a promissory note. If you do a debt instrument, a convertible debenture, a debenture, all of these things are securities. And so just keep that in mind and reach out. I can tell you that almost everything is a security, just so you know that. If people are doing mortgages, it's actually covered off in the Securities Act as well. My advice there would be to make sure that you're using a mortgage broker. But again, just reach out. And the subscription agreement, if you sign, like Doug McCartney, hereby purchase 100 common shares, something like that. It's going to be on the next page, and I hereby certify that I am a close friend of Ken Dunn, and here's how, or I'm a close business associate. It's not super complicated, and it doesn't need to be super scary, but it needs to be complied with, or it should be complied with if you guys want to make sure that you're doing everything the right way. And what Ken said about adding a personal guarantee, that makes the promissory note a much better instrument, right? Otherwise, I don't know, is it going to be secured against the house? Is it going to be behind a mortgage? If Ken is willing to actually say, oh, and I personally guarantee it, and so something goes wrong, so now Ken has made sure that I have a securities exception, and if something goes wrong, I have recourse against Ken. So that seems like a pretty good instrument to me.
Fellas, I want to talk about investor relations for a minute, because one of the things that I really loved about partnering with Axiom is how you guys help me stay in touch with the investors, communicate with them, fund them, pay them, all of those types of things. As our business has grown, we've now brought on an incredible resource full-time that's going to manage all of our investor relations. But for just the average people that are getting started in real estate investing, you guys are really focused on investor relations. I'd love you for you to talk about that for a second. If you're going to take money from people, it's important to honor those people, I think.
Yes, one thing you'll get to know is we say mutual fund trusts are simply complex, and that's the way they are. From Ken's point of view, we want to make it simple. He can go raise funds from registered investors, but there's a lot to it in the background. And part of that is making sure that when investors invest, that they understand where their money is, that there's statements produced, that there's communication. And so, that's one thing that Dwight and I set out to do, was to create a real system behind there where we had dedicated people who are going to help the investors that go into Ken's projects. Simply, like even things like setting up a self-directed RSP at a trust company. That can be a daunting task. So what our job is to take away that stress, make sure that investor, that we hold his hand all the way through, and that communication and that support goes through the whole life of what that investment is. So we have systems, we have staff, we have lots of communication with them, so they can call us any time, and we'll ensure that they understand exactly what's going on with the investment, and we're there to make sure that they feel comfortable in what the whole process is.
Yeah, the other thing I'll just say is that, mutual fund trust, which is what we create, is probably, something new to you, but it's also new to your investors. So you'll find that, it's welcoming to them to have a third party kind of walk them through what you're doing, what they're getting for their investment, and how that's going to work. And, our little motto is that you raise the funds, you run the project, and leave all that other administrative stuff to us. But it is comforting to your investor to have someone walk them through, and we do. We have staff that would say, this is what you're going to get with your investment, this is how it's going to happen, and this is the process. So I think, it gives them comfort as well.
All right, I want to switch gears for a second, because this is a conversation that we just had out in the hall, and it really has to do with the process of raising money. And I was talking to you guys out at the booth about the immense amount of promoting that I do online, where I'll run ads, send people to a webinar, and raise the money on a webinar. Actually, that's not true. I was corrected. I'm not actually raising the money on a webinar. But there's some pieces to the puzzle that you guys have helped me to put in place so that I can do that legally and ethically. But I want to talk about the back end of that, the EMD, and what an EMD actually is and how they're involved in the process, because that's the third piece of the puzzle we put together to make sure we do this the right way. So when I'm running ads online and inviting people to come do a presentation and making social media posts and inviting people to check out an investment opportunity, I'm inviting them to come and look at information. I'm not inviting them to invest in the project. Even when I do the presentation, I'm inviting them to speak to somebody about investing in the project. And I think that's the key difference in this process. So what's an EMD? What do they do? I know we got a couple here later I'm going to invite people out to talk to. And why is it that the presence of an EMD makes this whole thing safer?
Well, in terms of an exempt market dealer, and we refer to them as EMDs, is they basically are an organization that provides investment advice. So you think of an advisor, that's what an EMD. And they are independent of Ken's organization. And their role is to ensure that the investor is, Doug gave all those exemptions it was nice that you called me your close friend, I appreciate that. He gave all those exemptions, and so the role of the EMD is to ensure that those exemptions are valid. An exempt market dealer would then say to me, could you show us your notice of assessment last year? and they'll validate that exemption. And so that just gives more credibility to your investor. So the first thing that they do is that they would validate the exemption. In addition, they would also then provide investment advice. What is my concentration in these kind of areas of investment? Is it only real estate, or have I got a reasonably diverse portfolio? I'm going to use you, Ken, as an example.
Yep.
Ken goes and grabs a coffee at Tim Hortons. He sits down beside this elderly woman and he tells her what he's doing, and she says, I have $8 million cash sitting in the bank. I'd like to give you that $8 million for your project. An exempt market dealer would then say to that lady, I don't think you should invest all of that in one project.
That's right. Yep.
And that's just common sense. And so we would say that it's not suitable or plausible for her to do that. They might say, why don't you invest $3 million into Ken? Would that be happy?
Yep.
No?
Yep, absolutely.
And so that's the role of an EMD.
EMDs can also serve a second purpose, and that is some of them will then say, hey, Ken, you got a fantastic project here. We would like to also the opportunity to raise additional funds for you. And so sometimes they will take on that role as well too, where they will be actively promoting Ken's fund. So they serve two purposes. The first one, which Dwight mentioned, and that's one thing. If you come in and you allow us to create a mutual fund for you, that's one of the things we'll always tell you is get an EMD involved. You want to be securities compliant. So we don't force you, but we'll highly, highly encourage you to. And there's two very good reasons for that.
So when we get to the EMD level, you're likely on your way to kind of being like Ken and having a lot of success in real estate, right? But the EMD is doing something else, not just having someone's interested in investing in one of Ken's projects. The EMD will do all the know your client stuff that Dwight and Evan were talking about, making sure that the person is accredited or is a close friend and that they don't have super concentration risks. And I'm really glad that Ken's brought this up. Ken's activities, or the activities of the Dunn Mutual Fund Trust, they also need to be securities compliant. So when Ken was saying that I put out a webinar and people show up, he does that, but he provides information at those webinars. And so he always has an EMD. So if someone wants to invest, it's not actually Ken that's going to be talking to the investor. Well, he would talk to the investor and say, here's my project, this is what it looks like, here's why I think it's great. And then the investor gets sent to the EMD, so that it's the EMD that runs everything. But so an EMD is serving a lot of different purposes. It's making sure that Ken's activities are such that he's not offside securities laws, and then they're also actually protecting the investor too. If a person comes in, they could say, this isn't right for you, or this, you need to be thinking about diversifying your portfolio. So
here's the safest way in the world to do this from beginning to end. Number one, set up an MFT. Another thing I'll talk to about these guys, and I'll get you to comment on this, is when you set up an MFT, what actually happens is you're setting up a not-for-profit company, and inside of that not-for-profit company, it's allowed to set up individual companies. So every project you're raising money for is going to be its own company. The best part is they do all that. So I don't know how to set up a not-for-profit company. They do. They do it all as in a partnership. And what's really cool about this, is it fair to say, and this is where I'll have you guys comment on this, before you take on a client, you're doing your own due diligence on that client and what they're doing, because your reputation is at stake and potentially your own scrutiny by securities regulators if you endorse something that's not real or valid. Is that fair to say?
Yes, we do turn away business, definitely. And in fact, some of you have come and seen us at our booth, and we say, you know what, you aren't quite ready for a mutual fund trust yet. Like Ken says, you start with simple things, right? But as you get bigger and bigger, then the mutual fund trust will become right. You know, Dwight and I looked at how to set this up, and it took us probably a year and a half to 2 years before we figured out how to do it, because we had a very specific goal in mind. You can go to any lawyer and say, hey, can you create me a mutual fund trust? And a day or two later, it's done. Ours is different, because that's a single entity that you're going to put one project through. You know, Ken's a perfect example. He has multiple real estate funds in it. He has different businesses in it. They all go in the mutual fund trust. But you know what? It's like having a individual mutual fund trust for each of those projects. So ours is we call it a siloed approach. So what happens in one silo or one class of units doesn't affect another. So you can go at him and say, hey, I like your hot tub business, or I like this real estate fund, and you can put your money into that and not into something else. So as a developer, in the long run, it becomes a much cheaper way, a much more efficient way to do it, because you do have branding still that goes across the whole mutual fund trust. So it's the perfect vehicle for this type of setting.
I would say quickly, Evan is being maybe a little bit too modest. You cannot go to a lawyer and have a mutual fund trust set up in 2 days that's going to be compliant. You can have one that's basically like a shell company, but it has to have 150 investors in it. And I've been doing this for over 25 years now, and I have seen by, was it March of the following tax year?
March.
People running around offices trying to get everyone in the office to invest for $500, because if you don't get that 150, that investment actually is not a mutual fund trust. So the Axiom Mutual Fund Trust takes care of that because they have it off the hop.
Yeah, that's a good point. So when you do come to us and say, hey, I want a mutual fund trust, it takes us 3 weeks to set it up. And in that 3 weeks, we will provide the 150 people. And I'm going to talk about this later in the afternoon. But that is critical, because we have seen firsthand mutual fund trusts that don't make it. They don't get the 150 people. And it is by March 31st of the following year. In fact, our phone starts to ring around this time of the year. REITs and other mutual fund trusts will come to us and say, hey, I've got 30 investors, I've got 100 investors, and I'm not going to make it. Can you help us? Because if you use your RSP and you invested in that mutual fund trust and it doesn't have 150 people on March 31st, you're deemed to have withdrawn that amount from your RSP and you have to pay tax on it. So you're not going to be a very happy investor to suddenly find that your $100,000 is now subject to tax. So that's critical. Make sure if you ever invest in an MFT, it's got the 150 people in there.
Yeah. So what I love about the team that I've put together here is this is the way that it works. It's really amazing. So Axiom set up the whole vehicle that we're using to do this, made sure it was compliant, made sure it was set up properly. Now that I have the first project that I want to do, I go to my securities attorney and I explain the whole program to him. I provide him all the documentation from appraisals to budgets and everything we're doing. And he's got a team of people that vet that, and they create all the documentation that we use to raise the money. As soon as all the documentation's done, his company, his firm, reaches out to Olympia Trust, Pacific Western Trust, all of those people that have the registered funds, and they help us to set up that relationship so we can raise the money. Now we're ready to start raising money. Not quite. The next thing we do is we go to our EMD. Remember, we talked about EMDs earlier. This is what I love about working with an EMD and doing this the right way, is we go to the EMD, which in this case, we used a company called Atlas One. George Nast is the owner of the company, and they do all the securities vetting of everything that Doug has created. So Doug knows what he's doing, but he has a second set of eyes that are just going over everything and make sure everything is compliant. And the reason that we get them to do all of our compliance is because at the end of the day, they're the ones that are actually raising the money. So then once they approve it, Doug gets us set up to be able to accept registered funds and cash. And then next to that, before I start doing any marketing, any ads, any websites, I have to create all the ads, all the pictures, all the videos, all the websites, and I have to send it to George at Atlas One, and he vets everything. And George has come up to me dozens of times and says, there's no way you're effing running that video, and stops me from doing that stuff. Now, one more piece that I'm really excited about that we're doing now, and it has made my life so freaking easy. The other thing that Axiom will do, once it's running and everything is great, they'll take care of paying the investors for you. Now, you've still got to give them the money, but this is how much easier it is. So the last thing I want to hear a comment from you guys on, and this is really important to me, and this is kind of future thinking. I had a conversation with George about this, and we made this revelation together. When we think about registered funds in Canada, how many people in this room have a registered fund of some sort? RSPs, RESPs, LIRAs, TFSAs. The entire space is always going to evolve, is going to get better, is going to get different. When registered funds became a thing in the late 60s, there was very limited ways that people could actually make money with their RSPs. Basically, the only way they could do it is they could create an account through their bank and they could buy a government bond or something that had interest attached to it, and they could do that tax-free. As things started to evolve, people came up with the idea of doing something that was similar to stock investing, where the banks would have a manager who was an expert in a certain area, and that manager would go and create a fund that put money into a whole bunch of different companies. I'll give you an example. I think it's Clarington. I can't remember who has it, but one of the big banks has a hospitality fund. The manager of that fund has looked at all the public companies that are in the hospitality space and figured out how to invest RSP money into those and generate a return. Now, that's mutual fund investing, and it's massive today. That's where most money is put in these types of investments. But the challenge in mutual funds is, anybody here had RSP accounts for more than 20 years? Yeah? Raise your hands if you have more than 20 years. So for all of you that have had them for a while, how many people here remember when your mutual funds were giving you 15% in your RSPs? Does anybody remember that? That happened 20 years ago when they first started. And the challenge was, these mutual fund managers, right in the contract, it says they're taking 3%. That's their management fee. Which, if we were getting 15%, they were taking 3%, that means I was still getting 12% in my RSP, which was great. But as this has matured, and there's more and more of them, the returns have dropped. So now, what's happening is they're getting 7 and 8%, but they're still taking that 3%. So people that are doing RSPs and saving for the retirement, they're lucky to see 3 or 4%. How many people here are averaging 3 to 5% in their RSPs right now? Then all of a sudden this comes along, and here's what I freaking love about this, and that this was the revolution I had, is that for people with registered funds, what it's actually doing, it's allowing them to work directly with one of the companies that would have otherwise been in that mutual fund. So because I don't have to pay the mutual fund manager, I don't need to make money off of the returns because I own the core business, so I build my entire business plan so that I can give that 15% return for people that are doing a loan through the mutual fund trust, and it goes right into the RSPs. I believe that this concept is going to become more and more well-known, and it's going to replace mutual funds, old mutual funds, in the future, and more of this money is going to come into mutual fund trust, vis-a-vis this route we're talking about, which I believe is the reason that everybody here that's thinking about building a big portfolio should have one. I'd like to hear your guys' comments on that concept of, now that you've been doing it for a while, do you share that belief with me that this is going to become that mainstream? And if you don't, I'm happy to have you contradict me on it.
Ken, I totally agree. And I mean, that's why Dwight and I said a priority probably in 2019, 2020, we got to figure out how to create this MFT. If you ever ask me one of the things that bothers me the most in the world, it's how our government can say, I can only use my TFSA or my RSP in certain spots. And our whole banking system is built on that. I'm going to go to the bank and I'm going to get 3 or 4% only, right? So I think this is a fantastic opportunity to level the playing field and to say, as an investor, I can choose where I want to put my registered funds.
Yep.
Yeah, I'll just make this comment is that I recall that when the mutual funds started, there was a lot of onboarding of capital, and I can recall when they went down in value for the first time, and people realized, oh, this isn't like a term deposit. I could lose all my money.
Yep.
Right? And it was like an awakening, because there was this perception that a mutual fund would never go down in value. Yeah, my return might be less, but actually people were saying, I've lost 30% in my mutual fund.
Yeah.
And I think when that experience happened, people started to realize, well, if I'm at risk, then I probably want to start controlling the investment side of it.
Right.
And like you say, the investment return would have to be greater because there's not fees in between.
Precisely.
So I like to know what I'm investing in. I'll take the risk on. I don't mind the risk if I know the reward is there as well. You know, a mutual fund is just basically a pooling of money being managed by a portfolio manager. So-
Absolutely. Yep. Guys, thanks for being here today.